Life must be conquered again and again. You know that feeling, that strange, aching emptiness that can't quite be named? It doesn't arrive like a storm. It comes softly, quietly, like a fading light you didn't notice leaving. It's not sadness, not exhaustion, not even despair. It's the quiet awareness that somewhere along the road, something essential slipped away. You wake up, go through your routines, fulfill responsibilities, answer messages, smile at people who expect you to be fine. And yet, inside, something feels missing. You look in the mirror and recognize your reflection, but not the person looking back. You hear your own voice, but can't find its meaning. There's a dull ache where aliveness used to be. Carl Jung called this the alienation of the soul, the moment when the conscious self drifts too far from its own psychic roots. It happens slowly. Every unspoken pain, every compromise that betrays your truth, every time you pretend not to care, all of it pulls you further from your center. The soul doesn't vanish. It withdraws like a tide retreating into the deep. It waits there in the unseen. Jung wrote that what is repressed does not die, it only hides, continuing to influence us from the shadows. These lost fragments become the silent architects of our lives. They shape our choices, our relationships, even our recurring failures, until we are forced to look inward and ask, what inside me is calling for return? We lose parts of ourselves every time we hide behind a mask. When a child learns it's safer to be quiet than to be authentic, a fragment goes missing. When an adult stays in a place that starved their spirit because leaving would mean disappointing others, another piece slips away. When we choose numbness over truth, comfort over courage, a little more the soul drifts into exile. The modern world celebrates productivity, but rarely presence. It rewards control, but punishes vulnerability. No wonder so many of us feel like half versions of who we once were. And yet, those fragments never stop reaching for us. They appear in dreams that haunt us, in sudden memories, in moments of inexplicable emotion. They whisper through restlessness, through anxiety that has no clear source. What if your anxiety isn't a flaw to fix, but a message from your forgotten self? What if the sadness that visits you without warning isn't depression, but your inner world trying to be remembered? The soul speaks in symptoms when the heart refuses to listen. To begin to return, you must dare to descend into silence, into solitude, into the depths you've avoided. The work is not about becoming someone new, but about reclaiming who was lost when you chose survival over authenticity. Jung believed that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. That means meeting your shadow, the rejected emotions, the unlived desires, the truths too painful to admit, and allowing them to have a voice. Because every time you deny a part of yourself, you tighten the distance between who you are and who you could be. Maybe that's why, even surrounded by noise, you feel alone, because your soul has been speaking in a language the ego forgot how to hear. It's not asking for perfection, only presence. Not for control, only honesty. The way back home begins the moment you stop running from your own depth. Sit with the discomfort. Let the silence reveal what the noise has been hiding. That hollow feeling you've been calling emptiness, it might not be emptiness at all. It might be the space your forgotten parts have been waiting to fill. So before you label yourself broken, pause, breathe, ask gently, what part of me is still waiting to come home? Because what if the lost parts of your soul were never truly gone? What if they've been here all along, just waiting for you to remember where to look? For Jung, the soul doesn't speak in words. It speaks in symbols. It communicates through the language of images, sensations, and coincidences that feel too precise to be random. Every dream, every déjà vu, every sudden emotion that has no rational cause is a message. It's the psyche reminding you that something within you is alive and waiting to be seen. The unconscious never writes in straight lines. It paints, whispers, repeats. It hides meaning inside metaphors. The recurring dream of falling, the sudden fear of being seen, the stranger who says something you needed to hear. Each of these is an echo from the forgotten self, a signal from the depths saying, remember me. Jung believed that our dreams and synchronicities are not accidents, but bridges between the visible and invisible parts of life. He called the manifestations of the objective psyche, the realm where our personal experiences meet the vast ocean of collective unconscious. When you dream of a locked door, your unconscious isn't trying to entertain you. It's trying to reveal the threshold you're afraid to cross. When the same pattern repeats in your relationships, it's not punishment. It's the soul's way of insisting that something essential remains unresolved. The unconscious, Jung wrote in The Ego and the Unconscious, never rests. It is always at work, combining, arranging, striving to bring its contents into unity. Think about that for a moment. Somewhere inside you, right now, there's an ancient intelligence tirelessly working to restore your wholeness. It does not judge or condemn. It simply seeks balance. If the conscious mind refuses to integrate what was repressed, the unconscious will project it outward into your life until you can no longer ignore it. That's why you keep attracting the same type of person, facing the same conflict, or falling into the same emotional pit. It isn't coincidence, it's communication. Life becomes a mirror through which the unconscious tries to reach you. When we ignore these messages, they grow louder. At first, it's subtle, a lingering unease, a strange dream, a moment of sadness you can't explain. Then, if still unacknowledged, the psyche intensifies its voice. It sends anxiety to jolt you awake, depression to slow you down, restlessness to push you toward change. The more you resist, the more creative it becomes in getting your attention. Jung once compared this process to a river. If you dam the flow, the pressure builds until it breaks through in unpredictable and sometimes destructive ways. That's why suppressing emotion never heals it. It only drives it deeper, where it gathers force. Symbols are the soul's way of restoring dialogue. They bypass logic and speak directly to your inner knowing. The serpent, the ocean, the mirror, the child, these are not random images. They're archetypal, belonging to the deepest layers of the human psyche. When they appear in your dreams or art or daily life, they're not external curiosities. They're living bridges to forgotten parts of you. To interpret them is not merely to analyze, but to feel, to sense what they awaken in your body, in your story. Jung taught that symbols are not puzzles to be solved, but experiences to be lived. They are invitations to consciousness. So when you dream of running but never moving, when you feel trapped in familiar pain, when life keeps showing you the same lesson in new disguises, the unconscious is speaking. It's not punishing you. It's loving you enough to repeat what you refuse to hear. The patterns persist not to haunt you, but to heal you. But what happens when you refuse that call for too long? When the soul's voice is buried beneath years of noise and denial? What happens when the unconscious, ignored for a lifetime, decides to speak louder than you ever imagined? The lost parts of the soul don't vanish. They descend. What was once alive in you becomes shadow, and the shadow doesn't sleep. It watches, waits, and, when ignored for too long, begins to live your life for you. Jung described this phenomenon with unsettling precision. What you refuse to make conscious will return as fate. That's why people find themselves repeating the same heartbreaks, the same betrayals, the same moment of collapse that feel eerily familiar. It's not that life is cruelly cyclical. It's that the psyche is persistent. The unconscious doesn't punish. It compensates. It tries, over and over again, to bring back into balance what consciousness has rejected. You can see this mechanism at work in the small, painful loops of everyday life. The woman who always falls to the emotionally unavailable man. The man who keeps choosing jobs that drain him. The person who sabotages every moment of peace as soon as it arrives. These aren't coincidences. They're signals. Each repetition is the psyche's attempt to reconcile what was split off, to make you meet, once again, the part of yourself you refuse to love. The outer conflict mirrors an inner one. Every disappointment is a disguised invitation to wholeness. But the ego doesn't see it that way. It calls it bad luck, fate, or just who I am. And in doing so, it strengthens the walls that keep the self, your total, divine wholeness, locked outside. In the nature of the psyche, Jung wrote, life must be conquered again and again. He meant that every day, the tension between consciousness and the unconscious demands renewal. The psyche never stops striving for unity. What was once forgotten seeks reintegration. What was exiled seeks a way back home. The self, the archetype of totality, moves through your dreams, emotions, and synchronicities like an unseen compass, always pointing toward the missing pieces. But the ego, terrified of change, mistakes this movement for threat. It clings to what is known, even when the known has become a prison. To the ego, wholeness feels like death, because it means surrendering control. And so the battle begins within. On one side, the unconscious, ancient and wise, pulling you toward integration. On the other, the ego, fearful and proud, resisting the very medicine it needs. You can feel this war and the tension between who you pretend to be and who you truly are. It's in the moments you lash out and later say, "I don't know what came over me." That something was a fragment of your own soul, seeking voice, seeking light. The more you suppress it, the more force it gathers. Jung warned that the shadow is not inherently evil. It is simply what has been excluded from love. But when denied, it grows dark, distorted, and dangerous. The unconscious is not patient forever. When the rejected energy can no longer find entry through dreams or intuition, it bursts through as projection. You start to see your shadow in others, criticizing in them what you secretly fear or desire in yourself. The angry parent, the jealous friend, the manipulative partner, all become mirrors of the unacknowledged within. It's easier to fight an outer enemy than to face the one inside. But the more we project, the more we lose sight of what's truly ours. The world becomes a reflection of our disowned self, and we wander through it haunted by the ghosts of what we refuse to integrate. This is a hidden mechanism beneath our suffering. The shadow's rebellion against exile. It doesn't seek to destroy you. It seeks to complete you. But the ego cannot understand this. It fears a return of what it once buried, because to welcome it means the end of its illusion of control. To integrate the shadow is to die to the false self, to dissolve the mask you built to survive. And for many, that feels like annihilation. Yet it is precisely through the symbolic death that rebirth begins. And here lies the danger, for what is rejected by consciousness does not disappear. It returns, charged with archetypal power, demanding to be seen. When the ego builds walls too high, the unconscious begins to pound against them. At first, the knocking is gentle, a subtle anxiety before sleep, a sudden wave of sadness in the middle of a normal day. You tell yourself it's just stress or exhaustion or hormones. But the psyche has patience that borders on eternity. If the first whispers are ignored, it doesn't go away. It grows louder. Soon the symptoms arrive. Apathy, emotional numbness, the feeling that nothing in life truly satisfies you. You change jobs, relationships, cities, but the emptiness follows, like a shadow that never left your heels. Jung called this the autonomy of the unconscious, that moment when the hidden parts of the psyche, tired of being denied, seize control of the wheel. What was once unconscious begins to act with its own will, its own energy, its own voice. You see it in breakdowns that appear out of nowhere. A person who has spent years keeping everything under control suddenly collapses. Another, who seemed confident and invulnerable, wakes up in the grip of panic. The life that looks stable begins to unravel thread by thread. To the outside world, it looks like failure, but psychologically, it's rebellion. The soul reclaiming the authority the ego stole. Jung observed that when consciousness becomes too one-sided, the unconscious compensates with equal and opposite force. It's nature's way of restoring equilibrium. What you repress returns, not to punish, but to heal through confrontation. The cost of fragmentation is high. When we deny our inner world, it doesn't disappear. It manifests externally as fate. The body becomes a stage where the soul performs what the mind refuses to acknowledge. Illness, accidents, sudden losses, each can carry symbolic meaning. Each can mirror an internal imbalance. A man who lives denying his sensitivity might accidentally injure his hands, the very tools of his feeling function. A woman who suppresses her anger might find her voice vanishing, her throat tightening whenever she tries to speak truth. The psyche speaks through the language of the body when words no longer suffice. And yet, the unconscious is not cruel. Jung insisted, the unconscious does not want to destroy us. It wants to transform us. That's a difficult mercy to understand. The collapse that feels like the end is often a sacred beginning in disguise. Depression can become a descent into meaning. Anxiety can awaken a forgotten instinct to change direction. Every crisis is a summons to wholeness, a pressure from within urging us to expand beyond the narrow confines of who we think we are. The suffering isn't punishment, it's dialogue. It's the part of you that still remembers your essence, calling you back to the only language powerful enough to pierce your defenses: pain. If you've ever felt life corner you, forcing you to slow down, to surrender, to face what you've been avoiding, understand that this is not cruelty, it's initiation. Jung once compared it to a volcano. When the inner fire is suppressed too long, it erupts not to annihilate, but to recreate new ground. The old structure must break, so the self can emerge through cracks. That's the paradox of awakening. Destruction and creation are two sides of the same movement. So when life breaks you open, when everything that once defined you begins to crumble, resist the urge to rebuild too soon. Let the ruins speak. Within them lies the map of your return. Because the unconscious, in all its mystery, has only one purpose: to make you whole again. But there's a path to recover what was lost. And to walk it, you must cross the most feared territory of the soul. The journey toward wholeness doesn't begin with light. It begins with honesty. Before you can reclaim your lost parts, you have to face the truth that you are fragmented, that somewhere along the path of survival, adaptation replaced authenticity. So the first step, Jung would say, is recognition. Not intellectual acknowledgement, but a deep, embodied awareness that parts of you have been living in exile, hidden behind habits, masks, and carefully curated versions of yourself. You start to sense them in your reactions. The anger that flares too quickly, the sadness that lingers too long, the restlessness that never lets you rest. These are not enemies. They're signals within, the first flickers of forgotten self asking to be seen. Jung reminded us that we cannot change anything unless we accept it. That's the essence of shadow work. Acceptance without justification, curiosity without fear. You begin by observing your life like a compassionate witness. Notice what keeps repeating: your conflicts, your emotions, your dreams. Each repetition is a breadcrumb leading back to a part of you that was left behind. The ego resists this step because it thrives on control, but the soul thrives on truth, and truth often begins with discomfort. Once you recognize your shadow, the next step is integration, the conscious relationship with what has been repressed. Integration isn't analysis, it's communion. You don't dissect your shadow, you dialogue with it. Jung's method of active imagination is one of the most powerful bridges for this. Sit in silence, close your eyes, and allow an image, emotion, or dream symbol to emerge. Then speak with it as if it were a person. Ask, what do you need me to understand? The unconscious responds in images, sensations, and sudden insights that the rational mind alone could never produce. Through this process, you begin to build a very bridge Jung called the transcendent function, the psychic mechanism that reconciles opposites and births a new level of consciousness. In The Nature of the Psyche, Jung described this function as a living connection that unites conscious and unconscious data, transforming the conflict between them into a new attitude. That means every inner tension, every emotional contradiction, holds creative potential. The goal is not to destroy conflict, but to endure it until it transforms. The suffering that once felt meaningless becomes sacred labor, the process through which the soul reorganizes itself around greater awareness. Practically, the map of transformation can look like this. Observe your dreams. Record them upon waking without judgment. They are messages from your inner world, crafted in symbols that reveal what logic cannot. Track your emotional patterns. When you feel triggered, small, or defensive, these patterns reveal the borders of your current consciousness. Name your rejected parts. Write down the qualities you despise or deny in yourself. Anger, jealousy, vulnerability, each holds energy waiting to be reclaimed. Engage in dialogue. Through journaling, visualization, or meditation, converse with these parts as if they were distinct personalities. You'll find they carry wisdom as well as wounds. Act consciously. Bring what you've learned into the world. If your shadow holds assertiveness, practice saying no. If it holds creativity, dare to express. Integration without action is only awareness. Action makes a transformation. You'll notice that as you engage this process, life itself begins to shift. People respond differently to you. Coincidences align with your intentions. Dreams deepen. It's not magic, it's resonance. As your inner world becomes more coherent, your outer world starts to reflect that harmony. The unconscious no longer needs to shout through suffering because it is finally being heard. Still, the work is not glamorous. It's cyclical. There will be days when you feel closer to wholeness and others when you feel lost again. That's normal. Individuation, Jung said, is not a linear ascent, a spiral, a continuous dialogue between light and shadow, ego and self. Each revolution brings new clarity and new humility. The point isn't to transcend your humanity, but to inhabit it more fully, to allow divinity to breathe through your imperfection. And yet, even on this sacred path, danger waits. Because the ego is clever, it knows how to adapt, how to disguise itself in spiritual language. It can put on the mask of the healed one, the awakened one, the enlightened one. It can use insight to avoid vulnerability, wisdom to avoid humility. The moment you believe you're done, you've simply built a new persona around your awakening. Every crossing has its traps, and the greatest enemy of integration is the ego, disguised as enlightenment. When you begin to touch the depths of your unconscious, something extraordinary happens. Your world starts to shimmer with meaning. Every coincidence feels sacred, every dream prophetic, every pain significant. And yet, this is precisely where the greatest danger hides. Because awakening has a shadow too. Jung called it inflation, the moment when the ego mistakes expansion for enlightenment. You glimpse a truth so profound that it floods you with light, and before you know it, you start believing you are the light. The insight becomes identity. The humility that opened the door to the unconscious is replaced by a subtle sense of superiority. I've seen what others cannot. But the moment the ego begins to crown itself as awakened, the shadow grows darker behind it. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. Jung warned in the archetypes and the collective unconscious. It's one of his most sobering truths. The more we identify with the image of being good, spiritual, or healed, the more violently we repress what contradicts it. The shadow doesn't disappear when you discover your light. It deepens, demanding to be held with even greater honesty. True integration isn't about transcending the shadow, but learning to walk beside it, to let it keep you grounded while your consciousness expands. Without that humility, enlightenment becomes another mask. The spiritual ego, a new persona built on sacred language, but sustained by the same old hunger for control and validation. There are other traps that wait along this path. The first is rational denial, the temptation to explain everything with intellect, to dissect a mystery until it bleeds of meaning. The mind clings to control by turning symbols into theories. But the psyche is not a machine, it's a living mystery. The more you analyze without reverence, the further you drift from the soul's organic rhythm. Some truths are not meant to be solved, they are meant to be lived. Then comes a mystical isolation, the belief that awakening requires retreating from the world. You start seeing everyday life as an obstacle, people as distractions, relationships as illusions. But Jung saw individuation not as escape, but as engagement. The soul's purpose isn't to transcend humanity, it's to inhabit it more fully. Light that refuses to touch the earth remains sterile. Real consciousness is not withdrawal from the world, but participation with awareness, seeing the divine shimmering through the ordinary. And perhaps the most seductive trap of all, the savior complex. After touching your pain and finding meaning, you want to save others from theirs. You start speaking in absolutes, offering wisdom before you've lived it long enough to soften it with compassion. But trying to heal others while neglecting your own shadow only perpetuates the split. Jung once said that the best way to influence others is by working on oneself. Your wholeness radiates naturally. It doesn't need to preach. The moment you think you're the healer, you've forgotten that you, too, are still healing. The antidote to all these illusions is humility, spiritual groundedness, to remember that transformation is not a destination, but a rhythm. The unconscious never stops unfolding, and the moment you think you've arrived, the process begins again. Individuation is infinite, because consciousness is infinite. The goal is not to become flawless, but to remain faithful to the work, to keep descending integrating, and returning with more compassion each time. So when you stumble or lose your way, don't despair. It means the work is still alive in you. The ego will always try to claim the throne, but the self, quiet, vast, patient, will keep guiding you back toward balance. Because beyond every collapse of certainty lies a subtler kind of awakening, one that doesn't shout but breathes. And when the soul is finally heard, when all the fragments, shadows, and masks fall silent, something extraordinary happens. A silent rebirth begins. The lost parts of your soul never return as they were. When they come back, they carry the fire of everything you've endured. What was once pain becomes perception. What was once fear becomes compassion. Each fragment, once rejected, returns bearing a gift. Because suffering, when faced with awareness, is alchemy. The very emotions that once broke you now become the bridge between who you were and who you are becoming. This is not recovery. It's transfiguration. It's the soul's quiet revolution. Jung described this mystery in the archetypes and the collective unconscious. Rebirth is participation in the process of transformation. It is not the return to innocence. It is a conscious recreation of the self after descent. Through integration, the opposites within you, the light and the shadow, the joy and the grief, the control and the surrender, no longer fight for dominance. They begin to dance. The self, the inner totality that has always been there, rises from that union like dawn breaking through fog. The rebirth doesn't erase the darkness. It illuminates it from within. You start to notice how the same world now feels different, as if everything breathes in a deeper rhythm. The silence that once terrified you now feels like peace. The solitude that once felt like punishment now becomes communion. You no longer seek perfection. You seek wholeness. The unconscious that once frightened you reveals itself as an ally, a vast intelligence that was never against you, only guiding you toward balance. You realize that your wounds were never proof of failure. They were the entry points for light. The soul didn't need fixing. It needed remembering. And that's the paradox of healing. You don't become someone new. You remember who you've always been beneath the noise, beneath the masks, beneath the fear. The self doesn't emerge through escape, but through embodiment. You stop striving to reach heaven because you finally see it living quietly inside you. This is the moment Jung called individuation, the realization that your destiny was never about becoming perfect, but becoming whole. Now, when you look back on the path, you understand that nothing was wasted. Every loss was a map, every silence a teacher, every collapse a sacred initiation. The pieces you once cursed for shattering you were the same ones that led you home. The circle closes, but not in repetition, in revelation. You see how the unconscious has always been conspiring for your evolution, how your soul has been whispering, "Come home," even in the midst of your darkest nights. The journey doesn't end here. It deepens. Because to live awakened is to keep dying to illusion and being reborn into truth again and again. You will forget and you will remember. You will fall and you will rise. But now you know there is no real separation, only the illusion of it. The parts you thought were lost were never gone. They were waiting for you to remember the way back. You do not heal by returning to what you were. You heal by embracing what has always been yours. Comment below, "I choose to remember my soul."